Something moved across the Nevada desert last year that no radar system could name. Manta-shaped, low, and gone before anyone could log it. For decades, people who reported things like that got laughed at. But recently, FOIA documents and aerospace patent filings surfaced that weren't supposed to be public. And what they describe matches that shape exactly. So the question isn't whether the Black Manta exists anymore. The question is what it can do, how long it's been doing it, and why defense analysts in Moscow and Beijing are suddenly treating a program they dismissed as fiction like the most serious air power development in a generation. The Black Manta didn't start as a classified program, it started as a sighting. Through the late 1980s and into the 1990s, people near Groom Lake, the restricted Air Force installation in Nevada most people know as Area 51, kept reporting the same thing. A flat, triangular aircraft with no visible engine exhaust, no conventional tail surfaces, moving at speeds that didn't match anything in the public inventory. Aviation enthusiasts and defense watchers assigned it a designation, TR-3A. The Air Force said nothing, which in the world of black projects is about as close to a confirmation as you ever get. The program got folded into the broader pile of Area 51 mythology, sitting alongside confirmed programs like the U-2 and SR-71 that were also once dismissed as fringe speculation. And that's where it stayed. Unconfirmed, unfunded on any public ledger, and officially non-existent, until recently. What changed is a set of FOIA requests that came back with more than expected. The documents don't spell out Black Manta in plain language. They don't work that way. But buried in procurement records and program office correspondence, researchers found references to a blended wing-body advanced technology demonstrator operating out of a Nevada test range, with program language that maps directly onto nomenclature used in other confirmed black projects from the same era. The classification markers, the contracting structure, the timeline, all of it fits. Then the patents started lining up. Aerospace patents are public documents, but they're easy to miss because the connection between a patent filing and an actual aircraft isn't always obvious. In this case, a series of filings referencing plasma-assisted boundary layer control and low observable blended wing geometries started drawing attention from people who know what they're looking at. Plasma-assisted boundary layer control isn't a theoretical concept. It's a method for managing the airflow across a surface using ionized gas. And it has two effects that matter here. It reduces aerodynamic drag, and it changes the electromagnetic signature of the airframe. Both of those things matter enormously for a platform designed to enter contested airspace without being detected. The geometry described in those patents matches the Manta Ray planform that witnesses described near Groom Lake. Wide, flat, no vertical tail structures, with propulsion integrated into the body rather than mounted externally. That shape isn't accidental. A blended wing body eliminates the sharp angles and perpendicular surfaces that bounce radar energy straight back to the source. Lift gets distributed across the entire structure instead of concentrated on a wing. And because there's no separate fuselage creating a junction with the wing, you remove one of the biggest radar corner reflectors on a conventional aircraft. Black project engineers don't chase aesthetics. They chase physics. And the physics of a Manta Ray airframe solves several problems at once that a conventional platform can't. So if the documents confirm the program is real and the patents confirm the technology is real, the question that actually matters is this: what has been flying out of Area 51 for the past 30 years, and who else already knows about it? Start with the shape, because the shape is where everything begins. A conventional aircraft generates lift along a narrow wingspan while the fuselage just sits there, contributing drag and radar return without doing much useful work. A blended wing body doesn't work that way. The entire platform generates lift, which means you can fly at higher altitudes on less thrust, and you can hold that altitude with a stability that conventional designs struggle to match. For a reconnaissance or strike platform that needs to loiter in denied airspace without being seen, that combination matters more than raw speed. At high altitude, the atmosphere is thinner, which does two things for low observable performance. Radar waves scatter differently in thin air, and the acoustic signature of the aircraft drops sharply because there's less medium to carry the sound. So the Manta Ray platform isn't just stealthy by design, it's stealthy by operating environment. The airframe and the altitude reinforce each other, but shaping only gets you so far. The F-117 proved that in 1999 over Serbia, when a Serbian air defense unit used modified radar timing to track its flight path and put a missile into it. Passive shaping is a fixed solution to a dynamic problem. Your adversary figures out your cross-section, adjusts his radar frequency or his detection geometry, and the advantage erodes. What the Black Manta's patent filings describe is something different. A system where the stealth layer isn't fixed. Plasma-assisted boundary layer control works by running ionized gas across the outer surface of the airframe. At the aerodynamic level, that ionized layer reduces friction drag at transonic speeds, which extends range and reduces the heat signature from aerodynamic heating. Both of those matter for a platform operating at altitude for extended periods. But the more consequential effect is electromagnetic. Ionized gas absorbs and scatters radar energy differently than a solid surface. The cross-section of the aircraft changes depending on how the plasma system is tuned, which means the radar return the enemy sees isn't a fixed signature they can train their systems to recognize. It shifts. That's the piece that makes this categorically different from anything that came before it. The B-2 is exceptionally difficult to detect, but its radar cross-section is a known engineering constant. Radar operators and air defense planners can build their detection thresholds around it. An aircraft with an actively managed electromagnetic surface doesn't give them a fixed number to work with. Then there's the exhaust problem. Infrared detection has always been the backup when radar fails. Jet engines are hot and heat is visible from space. The patents reference low observable exhaust routing that integrates the engine outlet into the trailing edge of the blended wing body, spreading and cooling the exhaust signature before it exits the airframe. Combine that with a plasma boundary layer, reducing the heat from aerodynamic friction, and the infrared profile of the aircraft becomes almost as difficult to track as its radar return. 3 independent stealth mechanisms, each working on a different part of the detection problem. Defeating one of them doesn't give you the aircraft. You'd need to defeat all 3 simultaneously with different sensor types, which is exactly the kind of detection challenge that current integrated air defense systems weren't built to handle at the same time. And then the patents revealed something that nobody had a clean answer for. The propulsion architecture described in those filings doesn't correspond to any engine program in the public record. Not a derivative of a known turbofan, not a scramjet variant, not anything that traces back to an acknowledged development program. Either a classified engine program exists that has never surfaced in any budget document or contracting record, which would be unusual even by Black Project standards, or the propulsion system operates on a principle that hasn't been disclosed at all. That's where the paper trail goes quiet. The timing of these documents surfacing matters as much as what's in them. We're in a specific window right now where both Russia and China have spent the better part of 2 decades building layered air defense networks around a particular problem. How do you detect and kill American stealth aircraft? Every dollar that went into Russia's S-500 program and China's HQ-19 development was spent with a specific threat profile in mind. The B-2's radar cross-section, the F-22's flight envelope, the known emission signatures of the platforms they expected to face. Those systems are genuinely good at what they were designed to do, but they were designed around a fixed picture of what American stealth looked like. And the Black Manta's plasma stealth layer sits completely outside that picture. The S-500 is built to operate at extreme altitudes and engage low observable targets using multispectral tracking. It doesn't rely on a single radar band, which is exactly what made it a credible counter to the B-2. But multispectral tracking still depends on the target having consistent signatures across those bands. An airframe wrapped in an actively managed plasma layer doesn't give you consistent signatures. The system is looking for a shape that keeps changing. That's not a marginal capability gap. That's a foundational assumption failure baked into the entire detection architecture. When analysts in Moscow and Beijing talk about being shocked, they're not describing surprise in any emotional sense. What they're describing is a forced reassessment, the kind that requires going back through years of air defense investment and asking which parts of it are now irrelevant. That's an expensive and politically uncomfortable process, and it doesn't happen unless the threat is real enough to force it. China's response gives you the clearest read on how seriously they're taking this. Quantum radar development, which China has been publicly pursuing since the mid-2000s, accelerated noticeably around the same period these documents started circulating. Quantum radar works on a fundamentally different detection principle than conventional systems. It uses entangled photon pairs to detect disturbances in the environment, which theoretically makes plasma stealth much harder to exploit. China's VHF radar network expansion runs parallel to that. VHF operates at wavelengths long enough that plasma boundary layers interact with them differently, potentially reducing the stealth advantage. Neither of those programs is a coincidence. Both are direct engineering responses to a specific problem, and the problem looks a lot like what the Black Manta's patents describe. Russia's posture has been different but equally telling. There are reported increases in high-altitude intercept training among Russian aerospace forces, in certain long-wave radar installations that were decommissioned after the Cold War have reportedly been brought back online. Long-wave radar doesn't give you targeting precision, but it gives you detection at ranges and altitudes that shorter wave systems miss. If you're worried about a platform that defeats conventional radar through active surface manipulation, going back to longer wavelengths is a logical first step. The fact that Russia is dusting off Cold War-era technology to counter a 21st century aircraft tells you something about how narrow the available response options actually are. The deeper problem for both countries isn't the Black Manta specifically, it's the implications sitting underneath the confirmation. If this program has been operational for years, and the timeline in the FOIA documents suggests it has, then every air defense calculation made during that window was built on an incomplete inventory. Every wargame, every basing decision, every radar network designed to cover a specific threat axis was run without accounting for a platform that was already flying. That gap doesn't close just because the documents are now public. It means the calculations have to be run again, from the beginning, with a different set of assumptions. And that process takes years. Here's what the confirmation actually signals, because this part gets misread. When a black program reaches the point where its documents can surface publicly without triggering an immediate classification review, that's not an accident, and it's not a leak in the traditional sense. It means the program is mature enough that disclosure no longer costs anything operationally. Whatever the Black Manta was protecting by staying secret, its existence, its flight characteristics, its basing, the people running it have decided the protection is no longer necessary. You don't let this kind of material circulate unless you're comfortable with what circulating it tells your adversaries. That's a posture shift, and posture shifts at this level are deliberate. An operational debut doesn't require a press conference or a flyover at an air show. The aircraft doesn't need public acknowledgement to be deployed. What the documents do, by confirming the program is real, confirming the technology works, and confirming the timeline, is send a message through the back channels that decision makers actually watch. Moscow and Beijing don't need a White House announcement. They need to know the platform exists and that someone is comfortable enough with it to stop hiding the paperwork. The 2026 threat environment is exactly where a platform like this fits most precisely. Air defense saturation over the Pacific has reached a point where conventional penetrating aircraft, even low observable ones, require electronic warfare support, standoff weapons, or fighter escort to operate inside defended airspace. Those support packages create their own radar returns, their own communication signatures, their own vulnerabilities. A platform that can enter that environment independently, without the support architecture that gives away the mission before it starts, solves a problem that no publicly acknowledged aircraft currently solves. The questions that can't be answered yet are the ones that will define how significant this actually is. How many of these aircraft exist? The FOIA documents don't answer that. Where are they based outside of Groom Lake? The patents don't tell you that either. And whether the plasma propulsion architecture, that unaccounted for propulsion system the filings describe, has been integrated into any derivative programs is a question that may not surface for another decade. Black project lineages don't announce themselves. The B-21 didn't publicly trace its technology back to the programs that preceded it until years after it was already flying. The Black Manta confirmation is one thread in a pattern, Black project disclosures have been accelerating, and each one that surfaces tends to point toward programs that are already a generation ahead of what just got confirmed. Whatever comes next may be considerably harder to explain away than a Manta-shaped shadow over Nevada. A generation of air defense investment by America's adversaries was built around an incomplete picture. And the documents that just surfaced prove it. The Black Manta wasn't a rumor. It was a gap in someone else's intelligence. And that gap was operational for years before anyone outside the program knew to look for it. Somewhere inside a classified hangar, there may already be an aircraft that can reach any city on Earth in under 90 minutes, drop a strike from the edge of space, and land back on a runway before the enemy even confirms what hit them. No government has officially acknowledged it. No journalist has photographed it. And yet China and Iran are restructuring their entire air defense doctrine around the possibility that it's real. That's not speculation dressed up as news. That's the logical conclusion of a pattern that Skunkworks has been running for decades, and it's a pattern worth paying close attention to. What we're talking about is a program that's circulated in defense analyst circles under the name Phantom Wing, a black project allegedly developed inside Lockheed's most secretive division, built to operate at the boundary where atmosphere ends and orbit begins, and designed to strike from a domain that no adversary currently has any answer for. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why this aircraft, if it exists, doesn't just change the speed of warfare, it changes the entire math adversaries use when they think about confronting the United States. We're going to cover where this program allegedly came from, how orbital strike actually works, why neither China nor Iran can stop it, and what's real versus what's still in the rumor layer. Let's get into it. The SR-71 Blackbird was officially retired in 1998. For 25 years, it held the record as the fastest air-breathing aircraft ever flown, capable of outrunning surface-to-air missiles simply by accelerating away from them. When the Air Force stood those airframes down, the public story was that satellites had made high-speed reconnaissance redundant. Cheaper, safer, no pilot at risk. Lockheed accepted that narrative publicly and kept working privately. That's not a conspiracy framing. That's just what Skunkworks does. The division was built by Kelly Johnson in the 1940s specifically to work outside normal bureaucratic visibility, and every major platform it's produced followed the same arc. Something gets developed in secret, flies operationally for years, and only surfaces publicly when the program has moved far enough along that disclosure, no longer compromises it. The F-117 Nighthawk is the cleanest example. It flew its first operational mission years before the Pentagon acknowledged the aircraft existed. Neighbors near Tonopah Test Range in Nevada were seeing a delta-shaped aircraft in the sky throughout the early 1980s. The official confirmation didn't come until 1988. By that point, the aircraft had already been combat-ready for years. The B-2 Spirit followed the same pattern. The SR-72 followed it too, except in that case, Lockheed themselves broke the silence. In 2013, they published a concept article in Aviation Week describing a hypersonic successor to the Blackbird, targeting Mach 6, built around a combined cycle engine that could handle both subsonic and scramjet regime flight. The reason they disclosed it wasn't because the program was new. It was because the underlying propulsion technology had matured enough that keeping it completely dark was no longer the point. What matters about the SR-72 disclosure is what it implies. Lockheed went public with a Mach 6 reconnaissance and strike aircraft in 2013, which means the development timeline for that system stretches back well before that. And since 2013, Skunkworks has gone almost completely quiet on where that program stands today. That silence is meaningful. The Phantom Wing concept, as it's circulated among defense analysts and in patent filings tied to advanced propulsion and thermal protection systems, isn't described as a faster version of the SR-72. It's described as a categorically different kind of aircraft, not a hypersonic jet that flies through the upper atmosphere at high speed. Something that climbs above the atmosphere entirely, uses low orbital mechanics to cover distance, and then descends on a target from above at hypersonic velocity during re-entry. That's a different machine. It operates in a different domain, and the defenses that exist to stop conventional aircraft, or even conventional hypersonic missiles, weren't built with this flight profile in mind. To understand why that matters so much, you need to understand what orbital strike actually means mechanically and why the physics of it are so difficult to defend against. Think about a standard strike mission. An aircraft takes off, flies through the atmosphere at some altitude, crosses into hostile airspace, releases a weapon, and exits. The entire flight path stays inside the same layer of air that weather systems move through. That's the domain every air defense network on Earth is designed to cover. Orbital strike works on completely different geometry. The aircraft climbs steeply after takeoff, burns through the upper atmosphere, and crosses into the region where air is too thin to generate conventional lift. At that altitude, the curvature of the Earth itself becomes the flight path. The aircraft isn't flying over the planet so much as it's arcing around it, using near-orbital mechanics to cover thousands of miles in a fraction of the time any conventional aircraft could manage. Then it pitches down, bleeds velocity through re-entry, and descends on the target from almost directly above. That descent profile is where the 90-minute global reach number comes from. At hypersonic re-entry speeds, the distance between a launch point in the continental United States and a target on the other side of the world stops being measured in hours. It's measured in the time it takes to arc through low orbit and come back down. The physics behind this aren't theoretical. China's DFZF hypersonic glide vehicle uses a related principle. Boost a warhead to extreme altitude and velocity, then let it glide and maneuver during descent rather than following a ballistic arc. The phantom wing concept, as described by analysts tracking the program, takes that same logic and applies it to a reusable crewed or semi-crewed platform. Not a missile you fire once. A vehicle that returns to base, gets serviced, and flies again. Getting there requires solving one of the hardest problems in aerospace engineering: transitioning an aircraft from conventional turbine flight at low speed through the transonic and supersonic regimes all the way to Mach 6 and beyond demands an engine that can function across that entire range without stalling, melting, or losing thrust at the worst possible moment. Scramjet engines only ignite efficiently above roughly Mach 4, which means the propulsion system has to bridge that gap. A combined cycle engine starts as a turbine, accelerates the aircraft to the speed where scramjet combustion becomes viable, then transitions cleanly to hypersonic mode. Lockheed's work on this problem goes back years, and the SR-72 program was built around making that transition reliable enough to be operational rather than experimental. Once the aircraft is above the atmosphere and descending, something interesting happens with stealth. At the speeds involved during re-entry, friction with the upper atmosphere generates a plasma sheath around the airframe. That layer of ionized gas absorbs radar energy rather than reflecting it back to a ground station. Conventional stealth coatings work by shaping the aircraft to scatter radar returns. The plasma effect works by swallowing the signal entirely. The aircraft is, in practical terms, invisible to ground-based radar during the exact phase of flight when it's most dangerous. The X-37B program adds another layer to this. The Air Force's unmanned spaceplane has been flying classified orbital missions for years, with individual sorties lasting many months. The official explanation covers technology demonstration in a general sense, but several defense analysts have noted that the vehicle's flight profile, its re-entry characteristics, and the thermal protection systems it uses are all directly applicable to a crewed or strike-capable successor. Whether the X-37B is a direct ancestor of something like the Phantom Wing, or simply a parallel program solving overlapping problems, the technology it's validating maps cleanly onto what an orbital strike aircraft would need to survive and function. That gets at why China and Iran aren't just watching this program with curiosity. They're watching it with urgency, because the defense gap it creates isn't something either country currently has any real answer to. China's most capable ground-based air defense network is built around systems like the HQ-9 and its naval equivalents. These are serious, modern platforms. They can engage targets at long range, they're mobile, and they're designed to handle multiple threats simultaneously. Against a conventional strike package, they'd cause real problems. The word conventional is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Every air defense system ever fielded is fundamentally a solution to a geometry problem. A radar acquisition system scans a defined volume of airspace, detects a target moving through it, hands off tracking data to a fire control system, and that system calculates an intercept trajectory and launches. The whole chain depends on one assumption, that the threat is coming from a direction and altitude the radar was designed to watch, with enough time in the engagement envelope to actually intercept it. An orbital strike aircraft breaks every variable in that chain at once. The descent profile we covered earlier means the threat arrives from almost directly overhead, not from the horizon where most radar apertures are optimized to look. The angle alone creates a detection problem that no software patch fixes because it's baked into the physical orientation of the antenna arrays. To cover orbital re-entry angles, you'd need a fundamentally different sensor architecture pointed at the sky rather than the horizon, networked with fire control systems fast enough to generate an intercept solution in an extremely compressed window. That window is roughly 90 seconds or less from initial detection to impact, assuming the radar can acquire the target at all through the plasma sheath effect. 90 seconds is not enough time for any currently fielded intercept system to run a full engagement sequence against a maneuvering hypersonic vehicle descending from near orbital altitude. The missile has to be in the air before the geometry becomes workable, and you can't do that if you don't know the target is coming. Iran's situation is considerably more exposed. Their air defense inventory leans heavily on Russian origin systems, some of which date back decades. These aren't platforms designed to engage targets moving at hypersonic speeds under any geometry, let alone the near-vertical descent profile orbital strike produces. During the strikes attributed to Israel in recent years, Iranian systems struggled to consistently engage much slower, much lower-flying threats. The gap between what they operate and what an orbital strike aircraft represents isn't a gap you close with training or tactics. There's a psychological layer here too, and it matters as much as the technical one. Conventional deterrence works because both sides can see each other's capabilities developing in real time. Satellites track airfield construction, analysts count aircraft tail numbers, intelligence services monitor production rates. That visibility allows adversaries to calibrate their posture. They can assess the threat, build a response, and communicate that response as a deterrent of their own. An aircraft that can loiter in orbit for extended periods and descend without warning removes that visibility entirely. There's no ingress track to detect, no tanker support to monitor, no pre-flight activity to tip off intelligence collection. The first indication that a strike is happening could be the strike itself. Ballistic missiles follow a predictable arc from launch to impact, and that predictability is actually one of their weaknesses from a deterrence standpoint. Terminal defense systems have known intercept geometries to work with. A vehicle that maneuvers during descent on a profile that originates above the atmosphere doesn't give interceptors a predictable arc to solve for. That's not a marginal improvement in survivability. That's operating in a domain where the intercept math doesn't currently exist. So let's be straight about where the line sits between confirmed and alleged, because they're not the same thing, and collapsing them doesn't serve anyone. What's confirmed, the SR-72 program is real, Lockheed said so publicly. Skunk Works operates on black budget funding that's documented in congressional appropriations history. The X-37B is flying right now, somewhere above your head on a mission the Air Force hasn't fully explained. The physics of orbital re-entry and plasma stealth aren't classified. They're published aerospace science. Those things are facts. The Phantom wing name isn't. The specific capability claims aren't. What circulates in defense analyst communities is a composite assembled from patent filings on advanced thermal protection and combined cycle propulsion, from signals intelligence reporting that's never been officially sourced, and from the kind of inference that happens when people who track black programs for a living notice line items in the Pentagon's budget that don't match anything on the acknowledged aircraft list. That's not nothing. It's also not a confirmed program. Here's why the Pentagon might not mind that ambiguity existing. An adversary that believes this aircraft is already operational has to plan for it. They have to spend money on detection architecture they don't currently have. They have to redesign missile defense doctrine around a threat profile their engineers are still trying to model. They have to absorb the psychological weight of knowing there may be a weapon in their opponent's inventory they have no answer for. All of that happens whether or not the platform has actually completed its first operational flight. Strategic ambiguity isn't a side effect of secrecy. Sometimes it's the product. The budget signal points in one direction. Unacknowledged special access programs have consumed a growing share of U.S. defense spending over the past decade, and the gap between total black budget allocation and the programs analysts can account for by name has widened. Something is absorbing that money. Multiple somethings, probably, and the historical pattern keeps repeating. The F-117 was a rumor, then a fact. The B-2 was a rumor, then a fact. The SAR-72 itself was analyst speculation until Lockheed published it. Every one of those programs followed the same arc: denial, silence, then confirmation after the technology was mature enough that disclosure cost nothing strategically. Nobody outside the program knew the truth until Skunkworks decided they could afford to share it. That's exactly where the Phantom Wing sits right now. Either it's already flying and we're in the silence phase, or it's close enough that the rumors are doing useful work in the meantime. Both possibilities produce the same outcome for China and Iran. Whether the Phantom Wing is airborne tonight or still years from its first flight, the gap it represents is already reshaping how adversaries think and spend. China and Iran aren't building next-generation air defenses because they feel secure. The United States Navy just quietly admitted something that should shock every person who follows military news. The weapon it has been counting on to protect its most valuable ships may not be enough. China figured out the weak spot years ago, and now America is trying to solve it with a weapon that has never been successfully deployed at the scale the threat demands. What is that weapon? And why is the Ford-class aircraft carrier the only ship on Earth that might actually make it work? Join us as we reveal how the U.S. carrier's new light-speed weapon vaporized China's most expensive missiles. $100 million. That is roughly what it costs to build and field one of China's DF-17 hypersonic missiles. Now here is another number, $13.3 billion. That is the cost of the USS Gerald R. Ford, the most advanced aircraft carrier ever built. China does not need to match the Ford dollar for dollar. It just needs enough DF-17 to overwhelm the Ford's defenses before a single one gets through. And one getting through is all it takes. This is the math problem the U.S. Navy has been quietly wrestling with for years, and it is a much harder problem than it sounds. For most of the past century, American aircraft carriers were essentially untouchable, not because they were invulnerable in a physical sense, but because no adversary had the combination of sensors, missiles, and targeting technology needed to locate and destroy a carrier operating in the open ocean at any meaningful range. The carriers projected power freely because the cost and difficulty of threatening them were prohibitive. China decided to change that. Beijing looked at American naval strategy and identified the aircraft carrier as the single asset that made everything else possible. Take away the carriers and you take away America's ability to project air power across the Pacific. Take away that air power, and the entire strategic equation in the Western Pacific shifts. So China built weapons with one explicit purpose: killing carriers. Not just any weapons. The specific category of weapon that American air defense systems were least prepared to handle: hypersonic missiles. According to a December 2024 report from the U.S. Department of Defense, China now holds what the Pentagon formally describes as the world's leading hypersonic missile arsenal, built specifically to threaten high-value naval targets like aircraft carriers. That is the American military's own words in its own official document. The reason hypersonic missiles are so difficult to stop comes down to one word: prediction. Every air defense system ever built works by predicting the future. The radar sees an incoming threat, the computer calculates its trajectory, and your interceptor is fired to arrive at the predicted location before the threat does. The entire science of missile defense is the science of trajectory prediction, and it works extraordinarily well against any threat that flies a predictable path. The DF-17 does not fly a predictable path. The DF-17 is a medium-range hypersonic missile capable of reaching Mach 10 and striking targets from more than 1,500 miles away. And unlike ballistic missiles that follow predictable arcs, it remains maneuverable as it descends, actively shifting direction mid-flight. The radar sees it, the computer makes its prediction, the interceptor launches, and then the DF-17 turns. It does not need to evade your interceptor perfectly. It just needs to move enough that the math no longer works. At Mach 10, even a small course correction creates an enormous gap between where the interceptor expected to meet it and where it actually is. A leaked Pentagon document reported that China has assembled approximately 600 of these hypersonic weapons, while the United States had not yet deployed a single operational hypersonic missile of its own. That gap has been called the most alarming single statistic in American defense planning, and it feeds directly into the scenario that has kept Navy planners awake at night for years. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said in a November 2024 interview that 15 hypersonic missiles could take out all 10 American aircraft carriers within the first 20 minutes of a conflict with China. The entire backbone of American naval power erased before most Americans would even know a conflict had begun. So the question the Navy has been forced to answer is this: if you cannot reliably intercept a missile that maneuvers at Mach 10, what do you do? The answer they have arrived at is elegant in concept and ferociously difficult in execution. You stop trying to predict where the missile will be. You fire something that gets there so fast that prediction becomes irrelevant. You fire light. A laser beam travels at 300 million meters per second. There is no missile, no aircraft, no object in the physical world that moves anywhere near that speed. When a laser is aimed at an incoming threat, the question is not whether the beam will arrive in time. The beam arrives before the thought of firing it has fully processed. The entire problem of interception geometry, the calculation that hypersonic missiles are specifically designed to defeat, simply does not apply to a weapon that moves at the speed of light. The economics make this even more compelling. According to Congressional Research Service estimates, firing a high-powered laser costs between $1 and $10 per shot. A conventional defensive interceptor missile costs between $1 million and $10 million. China's strategy relies on the fact that overwhelming American defenses with a swarm of missiles is economically sustainable for the attacker, but ruinous for the defender. Every time the Navy fires a $1 million interceptor to stop a cheap incoming threat, the attacker is winning the financial war even if the intercept succeeds. Lasers destroy that logic completely. But a weapon that costs $10 to fire and can fire thousands of times without reloading turns a missile swarm from an economic weapon into a very expensive mistake for whoever launched it. But there is a catch. Building a laser powerful enough to actually destroy a hypersonic missile at operational ranges, on a ship rolling in open ocean, through salt air and atmospheric distortion, while tracking a target moving at 10 times the speed of sound, this is not a software update. This is one of the most demanding engineering problems in the history of weapons development, and the power requirements alone are staggering. The more powerful 300 kilowatt laser systems currently in development are capable of burning through the side of a cruise missile in flight, but only if the beam is held on the exact same spot on the fuselage throughout the engagement. On a moving ship against a maneuvering target in real atmospheric conditions, holding a beam on a coin-sized spot for several seconds while everything around you is in motion is an engineering challenge that has defeated program after program over the past 30 years. And 300 kilowatts is not even close to what is needed for hypersonic missiles. The Pentagon believes that stopping a true hypersonic threat will require a 1 megawatt laser, and officials have said that capability cannot come soon enough. 1 megawatt, that is 1,000 kilowatts. The most powerful laser currently being tested for shipboard use operates at 60 kilowatts. The gap between where the technology is today and where it needs to be to solve the problem it was designed for is, frankly, enormous. Which brings us to the ship that changes this calculation. Because the reason the Ford-class aircraft carrier sits at the center of this entire story has almost nothing to do with its flight deck, its aircraft, or its combat radius. It has everything to do with what is buried deep inside its hull. The Ford class runs on 2 A-1B nuclear reactors developed specifically for this carrier class by Bechtel. Together, they generate almost 3 times the electrical power of the A-4W reactors aboard Nimitz-class carriers, with total output estimated at up to 700 megawatts. To put that in perspective, that actually lands, the combined electrical output of the Ford's reactors is roughly equivalent to the power needed to supply electricity to a city of 100,000 people. The Nimitz-class carriers were designed in the 1960s for the technology of the 1960s. Every decade that followed brought new radar systems, new communications equipment, new electronic warfare capabilities, and every upgrade consumed power that those original reactors were never designed to supply. By the time the last Nimitz received its final round of upgrades, the ships were essentially at their electrical ceiling. There was no room for anything more, no capacity for future systems that nobody had thought of yet. The engineers who designed the Ford class made a different decision. The new A1B reactors are so powerful that only half the energy produced is needed by current onboard systems, with the rest specifically set aside for the future inclusion of advanced technologies like laser weaponry. When the Ford was designed, its architects knew that they did not know exactly what weapons the ship would need in 20 or 30 years. So they built in the electrical capacity to power systems that had not been invented yet. They future-proofed a $13 billion warship at the nuclear level. Only half of the electrical power generation capability on the Ford class is needed to run currently planned systems. The ship has the power reserves that the Nimitz class lacks to run lasers and future advanced defensive systems. This is the detail that makes the Ford class not just a better carrier, but a fundamentally different platform for the laser weapon era that the Navy is racing to enter. The current laser program installed on an operational U.S. warship is called Helios. Helios is a 60-kilowatt system developed by Lockheed Martin that integrates directly with a ship's Aegis radar and combat management system. Capable of engaging drones, fast boats, and at higher power settings, potentially certain missile threats at ranges of up to 6 miles. In a 2025 test, USS Preble successfully used Helios to shoot down 4 drones in a single engagement, which sounds modest until you remember that every one of those 4 engagements cost the Navy roughly $10 in energy, rather than the hundreds of thousands of dollars a conventional interceptor would have consumed. At scale, against the kind of drone swarm tactics that have proven devastatingly effective in recent conflicts from Ukraine to the Red Sea, that cost difference is strategically decisive. But the journey from 60 kilowatts to 1 megawatt is not a straight line. It is a climb up an increasingly steep engineering slope with obstacles that get harder at every level. Atmospheric distortion worsens as beam power increases. Thermal management aboard ships becomes more complex. Beam quality, the ability to concentrate all that energy onto a small precise spot rather than spreading it into a diffuse warm glow, becomes harder to maintain as power scales up. The Navy awarded a nearly $30 million contract in June 2025 for a project called Songbo, developing modular pulsed fiber lasers aimed at reaching 400 kilowatts by combining multiple smaller laser units into a single powerful output. The modular strategy is a direct response to the lessons of previous directed energy programs that tried to make one giant leap and repeatedly fell short. By building from proven smaller units and combining them, Songbo creates a path to high power that does not require solving every problem simultaneously. Meanwhile, the Pentagon's broader high-energy laser scaling initiative has funded industry teams specifically targeting megawatt-class output, with at least one program reported to be on track to demonstrate a system suitable for incorporation into the Golden Dome National Missile Defense Architecture. The scale of that ambition should not be lost. The Navy started this conversation trying to protect ships from drone swarms. It is ending up developing technology that could protect the American homeland from ballistic and hypersonic missile attacks. The same engineering challenge that begins with shooting down a drone over the Persian Gulf leads, if solved completely, to a defensive shield over the continental United States. Japan is developing a next-generation fighter that will control the battlefield from the air, not just operate within it. Designed to work with coordinated drone formations, this aircraft will allow a single pilot to direct autonomous systems conducting reconnaissance, electronic warfare, and strike missions ahead of the manned jet. The program, part of the Global Combat Air Program, represents a major shift toward networked air combat, one that regional powers are monitoring closely. So what exactly is Japan building, and why has it raised concerns about the future balance of air power in the Pacific? Join us as we examine how Japan's next-generation fighter is commanding combat drones and why it is drawing serious attention. For most of the post-war era, Japan operated under a constitutional framework that severely restricted its military ambitions. It could defend itself but not project power, export weapons, or develop an indigenous fighter without bowing to American technology controls that kept its own aerospace industry perpetually dependent on Washington's approval. That Japan is gone, and the country that replaced it is spending money, building alliances, and developing weapons at a pace that Beijing is watching with genuine alarm. Japan raised its military budget to 8.4 trillion yen, roughly $57.8 billion for fiscal year 2025, with an additional 1.5 trillion yen on related spending, bringing total defense expenditure to approximately 1.8% of GDP and moving the country toward its stated target of 2% by 2027. To put that in context, Japan's defense budget 20 years ago was legally capped at 1% of GDP. The number has nearly doubled, and the things Japan is spending that money on are the things that make China's military planners sit up very straight. At the center of all of it is GCAP, the Global Combat Air Program, a sixth-generation fighter jet being developed jointly by Japan, the United Kingdom, and Italy, targeted for operational service in 2035, and designed around a concept of warfare that goes well beyond anything currently flying in the Indo-Pacific. GCAP brings together Mitsubishi Heavy Industries from Japan, BAE Systems from the UK, and Leonardo from Italy in a program that incorporates advanced stealth, electronic warfare, artificial intelligence, and loyal wingman drones. The schedule calls for a technology demonstrator flight around 2027 and entry into service around 2035. The phrase loyal wingman drones deserves unpacking because it is the detail that most distinguishes this aircraft from anything in the current generation of fighters and the detail that most concerns China's military planners. Traditional air combat involves one pilot in one aircraft, supported by other pilots in other aircraft. A sixth-generation platform like GCAP operates differently. UK Ministry of Defence representatives have confirmed that the GCAP will carry sufficient computing power to control a system of systems, including low-cost autonomous drones, while operating deep inside hostile territory where connections to traditional support assets may be restricted, all while remaining survivable. Think about what that means in practice. A single GCAP pilot flies toward a defended zone. Around the aircraft, a swarm of autonomous drones fans out. Some of them carry radar jamming systems that blind the enemy's sensors. Some carry weapons that can be fired independently. Some fly ahead to draw out enemy missiles and absorb hits, deliberately expendable decoys that force the defender to waste interceptors on unmanned targets. Meanwhile, the manned GCAP sits behind the swarm, invisible in its stealth configuration, collecting data from every drone simultaneously, synthesizing the entire battlespace picture in real time, and directing the swarm's actions like a quarterback calling plays. Japan's Ministry of Defense published an evaluation report in August 2025 detailing the rationale for developing collaborative UAVs capable of manned-unmanned teaming with GCAP. The document highlighted two urgent priorities: the need to account for potential development delays to meet the 2035 deployment target, and the need for Japan to rapidly build indigenous UAV capabilities to ensure it could meaningfully contribute to any joint research and development projects in the collaborative combat aircraft field. Japan is not waiting for GCAP to be finished before it starts developing the drones that will fly with it. The two programs are running in parallel. Japan's fiscal 2026 budget allocated 4.9 billion yen, approximately $32.3 million, specifically for the collaborative UAV project to commence its conceptual design phase. Japan also announced that the Japan Air Self-Defense Force would participate in observation and training related to Boeing Australia's MQ-28 Ghostbat, a wingman being developed for the Royal Australian Air Force. Japan is not just designing its own loyal wingman, it is studying someone else's loyal wingman simultaneously, learning from the operational experience Australia is developing with the Ghostbat, to make sure its own system benefits from every lesson already being learned in the field. Now here is where the sensor architecture of GCAP becomes the real story, because the drone control capability is only as good as the information system that makes it possible. On current 4th and 5th generation fighters, Sensors still work largely in a stovepipe capacity. They share information into a common hub, but do not actively cross-check or prioritize data among themselves. On GCAP, a multifunction processor will rapidly process all incoming sensor data before it ever reaches the cockpit, synthesizing radar, electronic warfare, infrared search and track, and other inputs into a single coherent picture before the pilot sees it. The difference between a stovepipe sensor system and a fused one sounds technical, but its operational consequence is enormous. In a fifth-generation fighter, the pilot receives raw feeds from multiple sensors and must mentally integrate them into a situational picture under extreme time pressure, in a cockpit moving at supersonic speed while simultaneously flying the aircraft and managing weapons employment. In GCAP, that integration happens below the level of human awareness. The pilot receives a fused picture that has already been assembled, cross-checked, and prioritized by a machine. The cognitive load drops, the decision speed increases, and the pilot's mental bandwidth, freed from the work of synthesizing conflicting sensor feeds, can be spent on what humans still do better than machines: judgment, tactics, and command. The future aircraft's radar is intended to deliver 10,000 times more data than current systems. Leonardo UK's ISANKE and ICS architecture, integrated sensing and non-kinetic effects, plus integrated communication systems, will allow GCAP to sense first, fuse faster, share securely, and survive inside dense electronic warfare environments where detection, jamming, deception, and targeting happen almost simultaneously. 10,000 times more data. That number requires a moment to sit with. The F-35 is the most advanced fighter currently in operational service anywhere in the world, and GCAP's radar is being designed to generate 10,000 times more information than the sensors on aircraft of that generation. The processing required to make that data useful, rather than simply overwhelming, is what the multifunction processor is being built to handle. British defense official Group Captain Bill Sanders explicitly stated that GCAP must be able to work with any number of different loyal wingman drone types, not just one national design, because commanders in a real conflict need maximum flexibility to use whatever platforms are available. The fighter's weapons bay is being designed with the same philosophy, capable of accepting any weapon used by the partner nations, by NATO, and by the United States. That weapons bay flexibility is not just a logistics convenience, but also a strategic statement. In any actual conflict, initial strikes are conducted with the most capable and expensive precision weapons. As those stockpiles run down under attrition, the ability to switch to cheaper, more available munitions without sacrificing effectiveness becomes critical. GCAP is being designed from the beginning to accommodate that transition, to start a war with the best weapons and finish it with whatever is available, rather than becoming combat ineffective the moment its preferred munition runs short. Program officials have confirmed that GCAP is expected to carry roughly double the weapon payload of an F-35A and may have sufficient range to cross the Atlantic Ocean on internal fuel without refueling, unlike the Eurofighter Typhoon, which requires 3 or 4 refueling stops for the same journey. Double the payload of an F-35, intercontinental range on internal fuel, a radar generating 10,000 times more data, autonomous drone command capability deep inside hostile territory. These are not marginal improvements on existing technology. They represent a genuinely different conception of what a fighter aircraft is and what it does. Now set all of that against the backdrop of what is happening between China and Japan right now, and the strategic weight of GCAP becomes much clearer. Relations between China and Japan entered a state of diplomatic crisis in November 2025, after Japanese Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi stated in Parliament that a Chinese attack on Taiwan could potentially constitute an existential crisis for Japan, allowing Japan to take military action in collective self-defense. China's Consul General in Osaka made threatening statements in response, triggering a significant diplomatic row between the two countries. This was not a slip of the tongue. It was a deliberate signal from Tokyo that Japan no longer views its security as separate from Taiwan's, and China understood that signal precisely as intended, which is why the reaction was so sharp. China is not standing still while Japan builds. Beijing has its own 6th-generation programs underway. The race is real, the stakes are direct, and both sides know it. What makes GCAP particularly alarming for Chinese planners is not just the aircraft's capabilities in isolation. It is the coalition architecture building around it. On April 1st, 2026, the UK, Italy, and Japan awarded Edgewing the trinational industrial joint venture formed by BAE Systems, Leonardo, and Japan Aircraft Industrial Enhancement Company Limited, a £686 million contract, formally designating it as GCAP's Unified Design and Engineering Authority, marking the program's transition from a politically coordinated national effort into a fully integrated international acquisition program with a single design authority. This is the moment where GCAP stopped being 3 countries talking about building a fighter together and became one program with one design authority, one industrial chain, and one objective. Japan is expected to be GCAP's primary operator. The technology transfer involved in the program gives Japan access to advanced aerospace capabilities that it could not develop alone in the necessary timeframe, while also giving Japan stronger negotiating power and greater leadership influence over future defense exports. This is a country that was legally prohibited from exporting weapons for decades. Now it is positioning itself as a leading exporter of one of the most advanced combat aircraft ever designed. Japan has already fast-tracked a revision of its export restriction policies specifically to accommodate GCAP exports to allied nations, opening the door for countries like Australia and India to eventually acquire the platform. If Australia and India become GCAP operators, the coalition of nations flying this aircraft and the loyal wingman drones it commands would span from Europe across the Indian Ocean to the Pacific, surrounding China's sphere of influence with a network of interoperable, sensor-fused, drone-commanding 6th-generation fighters. That is not a theoretical future concern. It is the strategic architecture Japan, the UK, and Italy are deliberately constructing right now, and China can see every piece of it taking shape. Analysis from the Royal United Services Institute has emphasized that 6th-generation aircraft are essential specifically for the Indo-Pacific theater because of the vast operational distances involved and the vulnerability of aerial refueling tankers to Chinese long-range missiles. Such aircraft need to operate securely beyond missile threats with sufficient internal fuel and weapons to conduct extended missions without dependence on vulnerable support assets. This is a direct response to one of China's core military strategies. Beijing has spent 2 decades building missiles specifically designed to threaten the tanker aircraft and air bases that American and Allied fighters depend on. GCAP's intercontinental fuel range is not an incidental capability. It is a deliberate counter to that strategy, a fighter that does not need a tanker to reach its target and therefore cannot be denied access to the fight by destroying the tanker fleet. A new American fighter just surfaced, and it's already changing the balance of air power. For decades, the Lockheed Martin F-22 Raptor and the Lockheed Martin F-35 Lightning II defined an unmatched edge in stealth and technology. Then China introduced the Chengdu J-20 and later the Shenyang J-35, raising serious questions about that advantage. Now, a new aircraft has rolled out of Palmdale, the Boeing F-47. What makes it different? Join us as we reveal how America's 6th generation just shattered every record. The United States Air Force has spent the last 2 decades operating under a single, unassailable assumption. Its 5th-generation fighters, the F-22 Raptor and the F-35 Lightning, would maintain air dominance against any adversary for the foreseeable future. But the uncomfortable truth is that the F-22 was designed in the 1980s and entered service in 2005. Its production run was cut short at 187 aircraft, far fewer than the 750 originally planned. The F-35, while advanced, was conceived in a world where peer competitors didn't exist. It was built to do everything, and in doing everything, it made trade-offs that left it vulnerable to the kind of sophisticated integrated air defenses that China has spent 2 decades building. China now fields the J-20, a stealth fighter that, while not an F-22 killer, is capable enough to contest airspace that was once uncontestable. The J-35, China's answer to the F-35, is entering mass production. And the PLAAF has invested heavily in long-range air-to-air missiles, over-the-horizon radar, and a network of sensors designed specifically to detect, track, and engage America's existing stealth fleet. For the first time since the fall of the Soviet Union, the United States faces a future where air superiority is not guaranteed. They couldn't let that happen. The Air Force began searching for the next-generation fighter in earnest under a program called Next Generation Air Dominance, or NGAD, with a single overriding requirement: create an aircraft that can penetrate the most sophisticated integrated air defense system on the planet, win the air-to-air fight against any adversary, and do so while operating in an environment where every sensor is watching and every missile is waiting. The Air Force didn't try to improve the fifth generation. They leapfrogged it entirely with a platform so fundamentally different that it requires a new name for what it does. NGAD is not a fighter in the traditional sense. It is a system of systems, a manned penetrating platform designed to operate as the quarterback of a team of autonomous drones, electronic warfare assets, and sensor nodes. This concept was first demonstrated in classified flight tests beginning in the early 2020s. While the public was focused on the F-35's software updates and sustainment challenges, the Air Force was quietly flying a full-scale flight demonstrator of the NGAD platform. Multiple prototypes were built, flown, and evaluated in operational scenarios that simulated the exact threats the aircraft would face in a Pacific conflict. The existence of these demonstrators was confirmed by the Secretary of the Air Force in 2020. By then, the prototypes had already logged dozens of flight hours, proving that the underlying technologies, adaptive cycle engines, advanced thermal management, and autonomous teaming were ready for prime time. In March 2025, the Air Force did something unprecedented. They announced that the NGAD program had selected its winner and that the aircraft would be designated the F-47, a number reserved for a fighter that represents a generational leap forward. The F-47 is powered by a new generation of adaptive cycle engines, developed under the Adaptive Engine Transition Program, that can reconfigure themselves in flight. At low speeds, they operate like a high-bypass turbofan, sipping fuel and extending range. At supersonic speeds, they reconfigure into a low-bypass configuration optimized for thrust. The result is a fighter with the range of a strategic bomber and the sprint speed of a dedicated interceptor. Its combat radius is classified, but analysts estimate it exceeds 1,000 nautical miles without refueling, double that of the F-35. Its top speed is also classified, but the aircraft has been confirmed to cruise at supersonic speeds without afterburners, a capability known as supercruise that only the F-22 has ever achieved in operational service. The F-47 carries no internal gun. Instead, its weapons bays are optimized for long-range air-to-air missiles, the AIM-260 Joint Advanced Tactical Missile, designed specifically to outrange anything China or Russia can field. It carries a directed energy weapon, a laser, capable of intercepting incoming missiles at the speed of light, and it operates in collaborative teams with up to 6 collaborative combat aircraft, or CCAs, autonomous drones that fly ahead of the manned fighter, providing additional sensors, carrying extra weapons, and absorbing the risk that would otherwise be directed at the pilot. The aircraft's stealth is not just radar stealth, it is multispectral stealth. The F-47 is designed to defeat not just X-band radar, but low-frequency search radar, infrared sensors, and even electronic warfare systems. Its thermal management system is so advanced that it can dissipate the heat from its own engines and directed energy weapon without creating the infrared signature that modern sensors rely on to track stealth aircraft. In plain English, the F-47 is designed to be invisible to every sensor that exists today, and it has the computing power to adapt to sensors that don't exist yet. The tactical concept built around the F-47 is called collaborative combat, and its central requirement captures what the Air Force is actually trying to accomplish: manned-unmanned teaming at scale. Consider what this means for the first operational unit to receive the F-47. In a conflict scenario, a single F-47 would launch from a forward base, accompanied by 6 autonomous drones. The drones fly ahead, emitting radar signals, jamming enemy sensors, and presenting themselves as targets. When an enemy air defense system activates to engage the drones, the F-47 identifies the source of the emission and engages it with a weapon that outranges anything the enemy can fire back. The drones are not remotely piloted in the traditional sense. They are given mission parameters: search this area, jam that frequency, engage that target, and execute them autonomously, adapting to the tactical situation in real time. If a drone is destroyed, the F-47 continues the mission without missing a beat. If the drone completes its mission, it returns to base autonomously, refuels, rearms, and launches again. The F-47 is also designed for the strike mission. Its weapons bays are large enough to carry the AGM-183AR-RW, an air-launched hypersonic missile capable of striking targets at Mach 5 from over 1,000 miles away. It can carry the next generation of air-to-ground munitions, including small-diameter bombs and cruise missiles. And because it operates with drones, it can suppress enemy air defenses without ever putting the manned platform inside the threat envelope. The Air Force's total requirement for the F-47 remains classified, but the program of record calls for a fleet of approximately 200 aircraft, with production scheduled to begin before 2030. The cost per aircraft is estimated at between $250 and $300 million. Expensive, but comparable to the F-22 when adjusted for inflation, and less than the cost of the B-21 bomber program. But cost is not the metric that matters here. What matters is capability. The F-47 is designed to do something no fighter has ever done: operate inside the anti-access area denial bubble that China has spent 2 decades constructing. The combination of extreme range, advanced stealth, autonomous teaming, and directed energy weapons creates a platform that can go where no existing aircraft can go, strike what no existing aircraft can strike, and survive in an environment where even the F-22 would be at risk. All of this matters because the People's Liberation Army Air Force has spent the last 20 years studying American air power. They know the flight profiles of the F-22. They know the sensor limitations of the F-35. They know the range, the speed, the altitude bands, and the approach corridors. They have built an integrated air defense system specifically designed to counter the platforms they expected to face. The F-47 breaks every one of those patterns. Its range means it can launch from bases outside China's missile envelope. Its speed means it can arrive over the target before the enemy can reposition its defenses. Its drone team means it can fight without ever revealing its own position. And its directed energy weapon means it can defeat the one thing that has always threatened stealth aircraft: the surface-to-air missile that gets lucky. The F-47 does not operate alone. It is the centerpiece of a broader transformation in American air power that also includes the B-21 Raider bomber, the next generation of air-launched hypersonic weapons, and a space-based sensor architecture that can track every moving target on the planet. A future air campaign would see F-47s penetrating the outer layers of an adversary's defenses, clearing the way for B-21s to deliver massed conventional strikes, while autonomous drones handle the suppression of remaining air defense nodes. None of this means the F-47 is without risk. The aircraft is the most complex and expensive fighter ever developed. Its software is untested in combat. Its autonomous drone teaming concept has never been validated under the pressure of live fire. And the industrial base required to produce it at scale, the advanced composites, the adaptive cycle engines, the directed energy weapons, is only now being brought online. But unlike the F-35, which was designed to satisfy the requirements of 3 different military services with competing priorities, the F-47 was designed for one mission: win a great power conflict against China. That clarity of purpose changes everything. The first operational F-47 squadrons are scheduled to be established by 2030, with the aircraft achieving initial operational capability by the end of that decade. The critical design review was completed in 2024, and production of the first engineering and manufacturing development units is already underway. The supply chain, drawn from across 48 states, is being ramped up to meet the production schedule. For 2 decades, America's adversaries have studied the playbook. They have reverse engineered the capabilities, built weapons designed specifically to defeat the systems that currently fill the hangars. The F-47 is the answer they didn't see coming, because it doesn't just beat their best, it makes their best irrelevant. A Cold War bomber that has been flying since 1986 just became one of the most dangerous aircraft in the American arsenal. Not because it went stealth or because it got faster, but because the Air Force figured out a completely different way to make it lethal, and China's most sophisticated air defenses cannot touch it. How does a 40-year-old bomber become a threat China cannot track? And why does it terrify military planners in Beijing more than a brand new stealth jet? Join us as we reveal the details behind the B-1B Lancer's transformation into America's most dangerous missile truck. Let us start with a fact that most people miss entirely about the B-1B Lancer. Its nickname among the crews who fly it is not the Lancer. It is the Bone. B-1, the Bone. And for decades, that nickname captured something true about the aircraft. It was big, loud, and fast, and it was absolutely unmistakable on any radar screen. That was fine in the Cold War era. Against Soviet air defenses in the 1980s, low and fast was a viable strategy. The problem now is that the world it was designed for no longer exists, and the world that replaced it is one where flying fast and low into defended airspace is a way to get a very expensive aircraft shot down very quickly. China has spent years building a massive anti-access and area denial architecture that extends across the First Island chain and deep into the Western Pacific. The B-1B's large radar signature and significant infrared heat output from its 4 powerful engines make it far too visible to modern integrated air defense systems. In a direct penetration role against China's layered defenses, the Lancer would face serious survivability problems. So here's the question worth asking. If the B-1B cannot safely fly into China's defended airspace, and the Air Force is still investing money in it, what exactly is the plan? The answer completely changes how you think about what makes a bomber dangerous in the modern era. And it starts with understanding that stealth is not the only way to beat an air defense system. Sometimes the best way to beat an air defense system is to never enter its range in the first place. This is the concept the Air Force calls a standoff strike. The bomber does not need to get close to the target. The missile does. And if the missile is stealthy, autonomous, and has a range of several hundred miles, the bomber can sit well outside the most dangerous threat envelopes and still put warheads on targets deep inside defended territory. The bomber becomes a launch platform. Now, the question you ask about it changes from, can it survive enemy airspace, to how many missiles can it carry? On that question, the B-1B has a very compelling answer. The B-1B carries a payload of up to 75,000 pounds of ordnance across 3 internal bomb bays, with 6 external hardpoints capable of carrying an additional 50,000 pounds of munitions. No other combat aircraft in the United States military carries more. The B-2 Spirit, America's stealth bomber, carries 16 JASSM missiles internally. The B-1B carries 24. Every single B-1B in the fleet carries more missiles than the aircraft that is supposed to be its more advanced replacement. And the Air Force is about to make those numbers even bigger. The fiscal 2026 budget request includes $50.26 million for a new effort called the External Heavy Stores Pylon Program, which will restore the B-1B's long-dormant external hardpoints and provide significantly increased carriage capacity for standoff munitions. Here is the backstory on that, because it is genuinely interesting. The B-1B's 6 external hardpoints were originally incorporated into the design during the Cold War, specifically to carry nuclear-tipped cruise missiles. After the Cold War ended and arms control agreements removed the B-1B's nuclear role, those hardpoints were largely deactivated and fell out of use. They have been sitting there for decades, unused, waiting for a reason to come back. That reason has arrived, and it has a name: the Load Adaptable Modular Pylon, or LAM. The LAM system is designed to restore the B-1B's external carrying capacity in a major way. The current configuration can carry approximately 34,000 kilograms of ordnance, but the LAM system could boost that figure to just over 51,000 kilograms, an increase of roughly 50%. With 6 LAM pylons active, a single B-1B could carry 36 JASSM missiles in a combined internal and external configuration, 36 precision-guided, long-range, stealthy cruise missiles on one aircraft. A B-1B carrying 24 JASSMs internally can already launch its entire payload from 575 miles away, well outside the range of any current air defense system. The missiles fly autonomously to their targets while the bomber turns for home. No crew is put at risk. No suppression of enemy air defense is required. The bomber is not fighting its way to the target. It is opening the bay doors from a safe distance and releasing a swarm of missiles that do the fighting themselves. With LAM pylons adding another 12 external missiles to that load, we are talking about a single aircraft launching 36 precision strikes from beyond the reach of the air defense system, protecting those targets. 36 separate aim points, 36 separate impacts, from one plane that never entered the kill zone. Now here is where the missile itself matters enormously, because the whole standoff concept only works if the missile can survive the flight to the target after the bomber releases it. And this is where the JASSM comes in. The JASSM uses a combination of GPS and inertial navigation for the bulk of its flight, then switches to an imaging infrared seeker for the terminal phase. The infrared seeker provides autonomous target recognition. The missile matches what it sees against a stored image of the target, enabling precision strikes even if GPS is jammed or degraded. This dual-mode guidance is not just a technical detail. It is a direct answer to one of the most likely responses China would use to counter a JASSM attack: jamming the GPS signal. JASSM does not rely solely on GPS. Even in a degraded GPS environment, it finds its target. And the stealth design of the JASSM is what makes the whole concept viable against a sophisticated integrated air defense network. Even if an enemy air defense system survives the initial strike, its ability to intercept incoming JASSMs is degraded by the missile's low radar cross-section. In a saturation attack, dozens of JASSMs launch simultaneously from multiple aircraft. The defender faces the nearly impossible task of detecting, tracking, and engaging numerous stealthy targets approaching from different directions at once. Now multiply that by a fleet of B-1Bs. The Air Force currently operates 44 of them. If even half that fleet launched a full JASSM load simultaneously, you are looking at over 800 stealthy cruise missiles converging on targets from multiple directions. No air defense system on Earth was designed to handle that. China's air defense system is not an exception. The Air Force has already increased its JS-1 stockpile objective by 47%. Fiscal year 2025 funds continued maximum rate procurement of 550 JASSMERs annually, and the manufacturer is opening a second production facility specifically to double JASSM and LRASM production. The Air Force plans to increase purchases to 810 missiles per year, driven by threats in both Europe and the Pacific. But the JASSM is not the ceiling of what the LAM pylons are being built to carry. The Air Force is looking significantly further forward than that. The LAM pylon is rated to carry stores up to 7,500 pounds, which would allow it to carry the AGM-183 Air-Launched Rapid Response Weapon, the ARRW, a hypersonic boost glide weapon estimated to weigh around 6,500 pounds. A boost glide hypersonic weapon is different from a conventional cruise missile in a fundamental way. It is launched from altitude, climbs to near space, and then releases a glide vehicle that descends to its target at hypersonic speeds, faster than Mach 5. The combination of altitude, speed, and maneuverability makes it extraordinarily difficult to intercept. When the hypersonic weapons are ready and integrated, a B-1B could carry up to 31 of them internally and externally in a combined configuration. 31 hypersonic weapons on a single aircraft, each one capable of striking a target from over 1,000 miles away at speeds that defeat any current air defense interceptor. The B-1B would not be carrying bombs into defended airspace. It would be delivering a hypersonic missile swarm from a distance that puts the aircraft itself entirely beyond China's reach. The Air Force also has the Hypersonic Attack Cruise Missile, known as HACM, in development. an air-breathing hypersonic missile small enough to be carried in quantity. The LAM configuration could potentially enable each B-1B to carry up to 36 hypersonic weapons when fully integrated with conventional armaments. There is also a naval dimension to this upgrade that deserves attention. Adding the long-range anti-ship missile to the B-1B's external pylons addresses what Air Force budget documents describe as an air launch capability gap by providing flexible, long-range advanced anti-surface capability against high-threat maritime targets. In a Pacific conflict, China's naval power matters as much as its land-based air defenses. A B-1B that can launch LRASM from several hundred miles away, targeting Chinese warships without entering the envelope of those ships' air defense systems, is a significant naval strike capability in an airframe that was never originally designed for that role. Years of upgrades have also transformed the B-1B's internal systems. New secure data links, including Link 16, allow B-1B crews to exchange real-time information with other aircraft and platforms in a networked battle space. The cockpit has been reworked with modern displays and mission computers, and updated communications gear supports jam-resistant satellite communications for beyond line-of-sight operations. The aircraft flying missions today is not the same aircraft that rolled out of the factory in the 1980s. The airframe is the same, but everything inside it has been progressively rebuilt for the modern threat environment. A bomber built in the Cold War to outrun Soviet radar is now being rebuilt to outlast China's entire anti-access strategy, not by getting stealthier, by carrying more missiles, with longer range, with better guidance at hypersonic speed. The Kremlin has finally decided to go head-to-head with the top nations like the United States and China in producing a new stealth bomber that is about to change the game. The concept of war has historically favored the team that dominates the skies, and Russia seems well poised to strike fear into the hearts of potential opponents with its new bomber. How did the world react to the sight of the behemoth? Could Russia be on the verge of triggering another arms race? Join us as we discuss the amazing features of Russia's new stealth bomber. Rumors of Russia's new stealth bomber have taken a stranglehold of worldwide military space since the early 2020s. However, the wait is finally over. It is coming, and it is a monster. Unlike the very first types of Russian bombers, including the Tupolev Tu-95 and the Tupolev Tu-160, which rely on brute lethal force and speed as their greatest features, the new Russian stealth bomber, PAKDA, relies on invisibility as its greatest feature. Just how does anyone fight a bomber they cannot even see? Although rumors of this bomber became prominent in the 2020s, the Kremlin has secretly had it in the works since the late 1990s, when the Russian government decided on a need for a new strategic bomber with different types of technical and tactical requirements compared to its predecessors. Having drawn out a design for the bomber, the Russian Air Force needed to come to a decision about which company should be given the privilege of building the Kremlin's next-generation bomber. After many deliberations, they came to a unanimous decision to have the bomber built by Tupolev Design Bureau in 2007 before the finances were released to fund the project in 2008. However, questions begin to linger about the details of the design, especially after rumors of a possible replication of the Tupolev Tu-160, owing to its ability to travel at supersonic speed. But it was soon debunked by a public address from then Prime Minister Vladimir Putin, who implied that the new bomber would be a completely different design, which was an exciting prospect as well, since the United States and China had just unveiled their B-21 Raider and the H-20 respectively. Although there has been no press release or any form of publication confirming that the new stealth bomber was a direct geopolitical message to the forces of the West, which have consistently flexed their military might, there are theories stemming from Russia that the new bomber was an example of Russia taking the lead in the arms marathon that has silently been afoot since the World War. From Vladimir Putin's interview, it was almost too easy to tell that this was more than just some aircraft. It was a geopolitical weapon with a direct message of mutually assured destruction to the West. While the Raiders and the H-20s have dominated aerial warfare for a long time, owing to their beastly presence in combat, how much of a threat is Russia's new PAKDA bomber? Like General Giulio Douhet once said, He who controls the air controls everything, and Russia is definitely not oblivious to the fact. Ergo, the deliberation to create a bomber that matches up to the intensity of Raiders and H-20s. The Russian Air Force had quickly figured out that aerial warfare was moving slightly away from speed and creeping towards more intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or ISR warfare. Hence, they followed suit with the proposal of creating their own stealth bomber, capable of producing both hunter and killer functions. For some context, the Tu-160, manufactured by the same company in charge of the new stealth bomber, was designed to be a hunter mission bomber aircraft. It is a supersonic, variable sweep-wing, nuclear-capable heavy strategic bomber designed for hunter missions. It was commissioned to service in 1987, serving as both a conventional and nuclear bomber, following the requirement of the Soviet Union in 1967. The Tu-160 was designed with the perfect aerodynamic cheat code with the deliberate attachment of a variable geometry wing. The variable geometry wing, or swing wing in popular parlance, was designed to optimize all levels of movement, ranging from takeoff and landing to cruising. For instance, when the wings are in full extension, they give low-speed stability and do not require the regular length of a runway to take off or land. Hence, it makes it easier for the Tu-160 bomber to operate from varied airfields and carry huge payloads. While there is a huge chance that the bomber's aerodynamic wings could be optimized or manipulated to perform hunter missions, its sheer size negates its potential impact on avoiding the A2AD aircraft defense mechanism used by most top nations. Although the swing wings are relevant to attaining low-speed stability, when they are swept back, the aircraft becomes more aerodynamic and can attain and sustain supersonic speed, with little to no drags, as the aircraft travels at Mach 5. The Tu-160's ability to perform a wide range of missions because of its flexibility has made it a threat to the West and the big players in the Indo-Pacific regions, like China. Its mission flexibility gives it wiggle room to go from subsonic speed to supersonic, making it the best of both worlds, and op countries around the world have struggled to keep up with it. However, that just wasn't enough for the Kremlin. They wanted more, or maybe less, considering the fact that they want the PIKDA to focus on stealth more than speed, and reaching that decision by enforcing the decision that it is only retrofitted with subsonic speed. On September 3, 2009, the Russian Defense Ministry awarded Tupolev Design Bureau a 3-year research and development contract to undertake studies for the new long-range bomber. According to the President General Designer of Tupolev, Igor Shevchuk, this should be a fundamentally new aircraft based on conceptually new solutions. However, for a country with the number of aircraft and bombers that the Kremlin possesses, there is always going to be that one voice who questions the need for more. For some context, on June 12, 2012, then Deputy Prime Minister Dmitry Rogozin questioned the need for a new long-range bomber, pointing out the immense progress that Russia and their archenemy, the West, were making in aerial and anti-missile defense technology, reinforcing his point that spending billions of taxpayers' money on an aircraft when they know the difficulty of breaching these new aerial defenses. Although he had made his point, the Chief of the General Staff, Nikolai Makarov, responded by stating that the Kremlin's intention to put in the work and build this bomber revolves around creating a monster behemoth in the air that is much more superior to the United States. His statement was indirectly backed up by President Vladimir Putin on the 14th of the same month, who hammered on the importance of getting a new long-range bomber regardless of the impact of the Tupolev Tu-160s. By 2013, the PAKDA team had finally reached a decision to focus on the stealth options on the PAKDA, while also giving it a subsonic flying wing. Although there were published articles going against the decision to only add a subsonic flying wing, the rationale behind it was pretty simple. Russia already has bombers capable of subsonic and supersonic speed. Hence, they wanted something different in speed and size, but just flexible enough to perform both hunter and killer missions in a single run. The PAKDA's flying wing is a tailless, fixed-wing aircraft that has no definite fuselage, with its crew, payload, fuel, and equipment housed inside the main wing structure. However, it would have various small protuberances such as pods, nacelles, blisters, booms, or vertical stabilizers. The design gives the aircraft a flat shape while flying at the speed of a regular commercial plane, making it nigh impossible to detect by radar. However, the aircraft is much more potent than the deliberately shunted speed limit on the subsonic level. For a hunter mission, its ability to travel at the same speed as an airplane while having a flat shape, looking almost like a single wing hovering in the skies, gives it the advantage and leverage to get closer to its mark when it needs to perform killer missions. This design struck the perfect balance between stealth missions and killer missions. Although the designs bordered along the lines of perfection, there was one hiccup. How exactly does the flat-back plane hide all of its payload without drag and also be able to deploy hypersonic missiles without getting spotted? The Russian Defense Ministry had designed the flat-back bomber with stealth and killer missions in mind. Ergo, they found ways to integrate the fuselage and other parts of the aircraft into the flying wing, drawing inspiration from the single-bay design of the American B-2 Spurt, their direct competitor. But how does a subsonic flying wing aircraft carry and unleash a payload of hypersonic weapons and hit its target? The rationale was rather simple. Since the missions were flexible, meaning that the aircraft could be on a double mission in one run, hunting and killing its targets, the payloads are tucked neatly in the aircraft's body, making it impossible to spot even with A2AD aerial defenses. While the plane flies at subsonic speed and gets closer to its mark, the bay opens and the hypersonic missile is dropped on its target. However, the missile isn't fired from the aircraft. Instead, it is released at normal speed. Then the engine on the missile sets it up to go faster than Mach 5 and explodes on impact. The aircraft was designed to carry payloads the size of the Kh-47M2. The Kh-47M2 is a Russian air-launched ballistic missile with an estimated range of 460 to 480 kilometers and a reported top speed of Mach 10, which is twice the speed of sound. It can carry either conventional or nuclear warhead and can be launched by two 22M3 bombers, MiG-31K interceptors, modified Su-34 fighter bomber, and very soon the PAK-DA. Even before the advent of the PAK-DA, the Kh-47M2 had already been deployed on numerous war missions by the Russian Air Force. However, its most recent deployment has taken the most sting out of the West in the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. The United States has openly supported Ukraine and given them war support to keep them in a fight with Russia, who apparently has the stronger military and better military weapons on land, air, and the seas. However, during the Biden-Harris administration, President Joe Biden, in March 2022, confirmed that Russia deployed hypersonic missiles in Ukraine, which he described as almost impossible to stop. The message was clear. Russia has a missile that is nigh untrackable, making them even more dangerous than they were. And this time, they are in the process of manufacturing a flying wing subsonic bomber that easily escapes the radar and is capable of carrying the Kh-47M2. This perfectly balanced bomber was more than just technology. It was a message well received from Russia to the rest of the world. However, it wasn't until April 2014 that the head of Russia's United Aircraft Corporation, otherwise called UAC, Mikhail Pogosyan, announced that the Tupolev Design Bureau had finalized the design and that the project was moving to the intermediate phase, signaling the completion of the design and construction of a prototype. And that was Russia's first hiccup. The Russian Defense Ministry demanded 5 billion Russian rubles to prepare the Kazan Aircraft Production Association plant in Kazan. As expected, the old voices of reason, who believed that the country already had enough long-range bombers, were back asking the same questions. However, the Kremlin responded by releasing the requested 5 billion Russian rubles, which were allocated to reconstructing and re-equipping the Kazan Aircraft Production Association plant in Kazan. While it was widely reported in Russia that the first full-size model of the bomber was built, amongst various scale mock-ups of different configurations on March 1, 2017, it wasn't released openly, hence the public only had verbal knowledge of the aircraft. It wasn't long before doubt had started to set in, with rumors of PAK-DA being a ruse, making the rounds. However, in July 2018, the United Engine Corporation, otherwise called the UEC, and Tupolev, the company that was commissioned with the responsibility of building the PAK-DA, revealed that they had just signed a contract for the creation of the bomber's power plant. However, questions lingered on how they decided to create the power plant. Was it going to be some new groundbreaking idea, or was it going to come from an already established engine? Soon there were released reports that suggest a possible upgrade from the Kuznetsov NK-32 engine. In the same year, the Kremlin reportedly allocated 8 billion Russian rubles for the development of this new engine, which was contracted to JSC Kuznetsov in Samara. Although the specifications of the engine have been a well-guarded secret, its potential performances have been heavily publicized. The engine is rumored to provide the PAKDA with the required force to perform a 30-hour non-stop mission without having to refuel. But it gets even better, as it also comes with a temperature-resistant feature, protecting it from the effects of a nuclear explosion and a service life between 12 to 21 years. While the engines remained in construction, the PAKDA's final draft was finally approved, and the construction in the plant began in late 2019. Although Tupolev kept the construction process away from the media, Russia's state-owned news agency, the TASS, reported on May 26, 2020, that the very first PAKDA, which will be the finished article, was already in construction and will be finished in early 2023. Although Tupolev were the leading constructors, they had help from companies like NPP's Vesta, which announced at the 2021 Max Air Show that his company was in the process of completing the construction of the PAKDA's ejection seats and hoped to hand them over to Tupolev in 2023, the proposed date for the first sighting of the massive aircraft. While speculations of the KH-47M2 being the main hypersonic weapon to be fitted into the PAKDA's weapons bay had consistently made the rounds on the internet, on August 2021, it was announced that a new long-range, nuclear-capable hypersonic cruise missile, the KH-95, was under development to be fitted inside the PAKDA's weapon bay. Although the Kremlin has earmarked aerial warfare dominance, specifically over the United States, as the reason for funding the creation of the PAKDA, there is growing evidence that the possible integration of a hypersonic missile carrying a nuclear warhead might be an overkill, but is capable of changing aerial warfare forever. Could Russia finally take the giant leap over the United States and China, who have recently been at the top of the food chain in aerial combat? Could the creation of the PAKDA spark a new global arms race? While the world holds its breath in grievous anticipation of Russia's release of the PAKDA, the United States and China have decided to raise the stakes even further, especially the United States, who are now looking to upgrade their long-range bombers. But just how does their Northrop Grumman B-21 Raider fare, in contrast with the PAKDA? America developed its Long-Range Strike Bomber, or LSB program in 2011, with only one goal in mind: aerial dominance. Over the years, aerial warfare has hit a fever pitch, and there is no bringing it down. Hence the hot pursuit of top countries who are looking to not only get in on the action, but be at the very top of the food chain. Hence America's decision to come up with the B-21 Raider. The Raider is proposed to be a stealth intercontinental strategic bomber that can deliver conventional and thermonuclear weapons. Named Raider in honor of the Doolittle Raiders of the Second World War, the B-21 is meant to replace the Rockwell B-1 Lancer and Northrop B-2 Spirit by 2040, and possibly the Boeing B-52 Stratofortress after that. Although, just like the PAKDA, the B-21 Raider has been touted for a release in 2023, especially since the first flight of the Raider already occurred on November 10, 2023, and 3 of them, which were considered airworthy, were involved in program testing in September 2024. However, neither nation has fully released their new bombers. Although there are reports of technical delays, like with the PAKDA, where the sanctions following the Kremlin's invasion of Ukraine, starting the Russo-Ukrainian War in 2022, have been rumored to halt their momentum, and the B-21 Raider has been touted to be undergoing early-stage flight testing, there are other geopolitical rumors that have effortlessly made the rounds in the media. For some context, there are speculations that both countries are in the middle of a game of chicken, seeing who blinks first, with hopes that the first release is assessed by the other country, who then upgrades theirs to remain on top of the food chain. Although the speculation seemed to have stuck because neither nation has presented their aircraft in the timeline that they proposed, Russia has come flying out of the gates in a rush to defend their position. Russian Deputy Prime Minister Denis Manturov has openly discussed the common struggles with schedules around the world, but he assures Russia and the entire world that the sanctions following the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine would not affect the timing of the creation of the PAKDA, as the bomber does not contain any foreign components. Although he made these bold claims in 2022, promising that the aircraft would be completed by 2026, with a prototype ready by 2023, as of June 2025, there are still no reports of a prototype. While the world waits for this new stealth subsonic behemoth bomber capable of hosting and launching hypersonic missiles with nuclear warheads, the potential reaction of other top countries remains to be seen, as aerial warfare might change forever. The United States just revealed a bomber so secret that even Congress does not know what it can do. And within weeks, Russia accelerated weapons programs. This is not a fighter jet. The B-21 Raider was built to enter airspace undetected and fly nuclear missions with just one pilot. Why are adversaries building defenses against a threat they cannot see, and what forced them to rethink decades of planning? Join us as we find out why the B-21 has Russia genuinely panicking. For decades, Russia and China constructed their air defense networks around one core assumption. They understood American bomber capabilities. Massive radar arrays blanketed contested regions. Surface-to-air missile batteries were positioned to intercept known flight profiles. Military strategists mapped scenarios based on the B-2 Spirit, a stealth bomber with limitations they'd studied exhaustively and believed they could counter. Then the B-21 was revealed, and that assumption was shattered. The geopolitical chessboard shifted. China rehearses military operations around Taiwan with alarming frequency. Russia demonstrated in Ukraine that modern warfare extends far beyond traditional battlefields into cyberspace and the electromagnetic spectrum. Coordinated autonomous systems now determine outcomes as decisively as bombs. America's existing bomber fleet, despite its raw power, was designed for a strategic environment that no longer exists. The B-2 Spirit costs over $150,000 per flight hour and requires 51 hours of maintenance for every hour airborne. It cannot be serviced outside specialized, climate-controlled facilities, which limits where and how often it can operate. Each mission demands months of preparation, coordination, and post-flight restoration, reducing flexibility during crises. Strategic deterrence only functions when adversaries believe a weapon will be used, and when a stealth bomber is too costly and fragile for sustained operations, its deterrent value becomes theoretical rather than operational. It serves like a conventional aircraft, using standard hangars and requiring hours instead of months. More critically, it was designed from inception to dominate an integrated battle space where cyber warfare, electronic attacks, drone swarms, and hypersonic missiles converge simultaneously. Here is what genuinely concerns Russian and Chinese military planners. This is not an experimental platform trapped in testing phases. 3 aircraft already exist, and production facilities are manufacturing 7 to 8 additional bombers each year, with a planned fleet of 100. This means operational squadrons will form while adversaries are still validating prototypes. By the time Russia fields the PAKDA and China introduces the H-20, dozens of B-21s will already be deployed, with crews logging thousands of flight hours, developing tactics, integrating new software, and identifying weaknesses long before opponents encounter the aircraft in conflict. Russia invested enormous resources in constructing air defenses optimized for known platforms, known signatures, and predictable mission profiles. Those systems were built on assumptions that no longer hold. As the B-21 enters service, entire layers of that defensive architecture risk becoming obsolete before reaching full operational maturity. Meanwhile, Chinese military planners face a similar dilemma. Their H-20 stealth bomber is still in development, with prototypes undergoing initial testing and no operational squadrons yet formed. China has devoted decades to refining defensive doctrines around anticipated American capabilities, but the B-21's operational pace undermines these preparations. By the time the H-20 becomes mission-ready, B-21 crews will have accumulated thousands of flight hours, integrated AI-assisted systems, and established operational concepts that effectively leapfrog China's planned deployment schedule, forcing a fundamental recalibration of Chinese air defense planning. But here's the part most analysts miss. How one aircraft platform creates this kind of disruption reveals something far more significant than stealth technology alone. According to a leaked Air Force Global Strike Command memo, the B-21 Raider will fly 40-hour globe-spanning nuclear strike missions with just one human pilot on board. Not two pilots like every heavy bomber in American history. One pilot and one weapons systems officer. This single detail reveals the most significant shift in air warfare since stealth itself. Advanced AI autonomy has arrived in strategic aviation. Every current bomber requires multiple pilots because the cognitive load is immense. The B-52, B-1B Lancer, and even the B-2 Spirit operate with paired pilots and weapons officers. During marathon missions, they meticulously schedule every task, managing sleep in shifts to ensure alertness for weapons engagement and the complex, dangerous mid-flight refuelings that occur every few hours. Retired Air Force Colonel Mel Dell, who flew a record 44.3-hour B-2 mission, described the brutal reality, constantly reviewing target folders, monitoring fuel consumption, replanning routes when coordinates change mid-flight, which happens regularly, all while fighting fatigue so extreme that flight surgeons issue amphetamine, go pills just to keep pilots functional. The single pilot configuration reveals the B-21's true revolution. The pilot's role fundamentally shifts from actively flying the aircraft to supervising an artificial intelligence system that handles flight operations. But this isn't autopilot. Commercial autopilot executes pre-programmed directives. When circumstances change, humans must intervene manually. The B-21's AI operates on a completely different level. It processes data from the same sensor arrays human operators use, but responds faster and never experiences fatigue. When surface-to-air missile radar locks onto the bomber, the AI deploys radio frequency countermeasures and executes evasive maneuvers, potentially faster than human reaction time allows. When new battlefield threats emerge that weren't present during mission planning, the AI rapidly calculates optimal routes through contested airspace, automatically adjusting course while notifying the pilot. The AI handles routine operations and many complex tasks as effectively as human operators, allowing the pilot to serve primarily as mission supervisor. During extended missions, the human pilot can rest between refuelings while the AI manages flight operations. Strategic analysts understand what this means. America has operationally implemented jury AI-assisted combat aviation while adversaries are still building traditional crewed platforms. That is a generational technological leap that compounds over time as AI systems learn and improve. But even sophisticated AI can't help if enemy radar detects you. So how does a 40-meter wide aircraft achieve a radar cross-section the size of a tennis ball? Making a 40-meter wide aircraft appear the size of a tennis ball on radar screens isn't marketing exaggeration. It's the B-21's reported radar cross-section. And understanding why this matters requires grasping what stealth means in modern warfare. Every millimeter of this aircraft's surface matters. One imperfect seam, one slight edge, and stealth effectiveness degrades. Russian and Chinese air defense networks were designed to detect large metal structures with engines, wings, and distinct radar returns. The B-21 was engineered to betray none of those signatures. The bomber is covered in a specialized coating that absorbs radar waves rather than reflecting them. But this represents just the foundation of a multi-layered signature reduction system. The cockpit windows blend seamlessly into the airframe with minimal edges for radar to catch. Every joint, every seam, every crevice that could compromise the radar cross-section has been eliminated from external view. Onboard electronics don't just reduce radar signature, they can actively deceive enemy systems, making hostile radar see something that isn't there, or more accurately, see almost nothing worth investigating. The engines reveal engineering obsession. They're recessed deep into the wings, completely hidden from direct observation and angled to minimize thermal signatures. The narrow exhaust design represents a massive improvement over the B-2's configuration that created detectable heat signatures. The B-21's engines reach Mach 0.8, not supersonic, because when signature management is this effective, you don't need to outrun missiles. Speed creates noise and heat. Stealth creates operational advantage. Here's where physics becomes weaponized. Every curve on this aircraft is continuous. Every angle mirrors itself throughout the structure. When radar waves hit flat surfaces, they bounce directly back to the emitter, creating obvious radar returns. But curved surfaces scatter those waves in multiple directions simultaneously, fragmenting the radar return into background noise that operators dismiss as atmospheric interference. The construction process itself reveals the obsession. Unlike any aircraft in history, the B-21 is built from the outside in, completely backwards from normal assembly. Traditional aircraft are built from the inside out. Why reverse this proven method? Because radar detects surface imperfections, the smooth outer surface must be perfected before internal components are installed. On the B-2, maintenance crews had to hand-remove exterior coating to access wiring beneath over 100 panels, a process taking months in climate-controlled facilities. The B-21 has simple maintenance doors, allowing service work in normal hangars over hours. This seemingly minor detail has massive operational implications. You can actually use the bomber regularly instead of treating it like a museum piece. But signature reduction alone isn't what terrifies Russian strategists. What truly concerns them is how this platform adapts to threats that don't even exist yet. Every previous stealth bomber became outdated the moment it entered service. New threats emerged, technology advanced, and multi-billion-dollar aircraft became frozen in time. Upgrading meant years of retrofitting and astronomical costs. The B-21 shatters this paradigm with one revolutionary concept: open architecture software that turns a bomber into an infinitely adaptable weapons platform. Think of your smartphone. You don't buy a new device for different capabilities. You download apps. The B-21 applies this exact logic to weapon systems and mission profiles. Need to share real-time location data with satellites? Software integration? Want to run a new electronic warfare program? Download and deploy it. The bomber can be reconfigured for entirely different missions between sorties. Engineers can develop specialized reconnaissance systems, test them, deploy them on a mission, then seamlessly replace them with combat-focused configurations the next day. No hardware replacement required, no months of retrofitting, pure adaptability. This represents warfare reimagined. Russian military planners build defenses against known capabilities, specific sensors, particular weapon systems, and understood tactics. But how do you defend against a platform that fundamentally changes what it can do between missions? Today's reconnaissance aircraft becomes tomorrow's electronic warfare platform, which becomes next week's drone command center, all using the same airframe. The B-21 was designed as one component in a family of systems, integrating with joint all-domain command and control, connecting every sensor across the U.S. military for instant information sharing. Satellites, drones, submarines, tanks, ships, and bombers share information simultaneously, functioning like interconnected nodes of a single distributed intelligence, spanning all domains. Future operational concepts envision the B-21 flying alongside autonomous drone wingmen that guide, share targeting data, and act as decoys to distract enemy radar. But the bomber isn't just dropping ordnance. It serves as an airborne command center, issuing real-time orders to drones, directing formations, coordinating with naval assets, all while maintaining its primary strike capability. Consider the scenario keeping Chinese military planners awake. China begins operations against Taiwan. Within minutes, a B-21 launches from a Pacific base. It arrives coordinating drone swarms, accessing communication networks to locate high-value targets, directing precision strikes without ever entering hostile airspace itself. The bomber carries long-range weapons with standoff capability and an 11,000-kilometer unrefueled range. Virtually no location on Earth remains beyond reach. Here's what truly matters. The brilliance isn't being the newest technology. It's perpetually adapting to what's new. Open architecture means continuous capability enhancement. Revolutionary sensors developed in 5 years? Integrate them seamlessly. Next-generation electronic warfare capabilities? Download and deploy advanced AI algorithms, update the software. Whatever technological breakthroughs emerge over the next 3 decades, this platform absorbs them without requiring new aircraft. Russia's PAKDA and China's H-20 are being designed for today's battlefield using today's technology. The B-21 is being designed for battlefields that haven't been imagined yet, but software means nothing if you can't manufacture the actual aircraft at scale. And here's where the production numbers should genuinely concern adversaries. Welcome to Plant 42, Northrop Grumman's partially classified facility in Palmdale, California, where 8,000 workers are manufacturing America's stealth bomber fleet at a pace that fundamentally changes strategic calculations. Current intelligence suggests they're delivering 7 to 8 aircraft annually, and that production tempo is accelerating. To understand why this matters, consider the catastrophic B-2 procurement failure. Original plans called for 132 aircraft at $500 million each. What did America actually receive? 21 planes costing $2 billion apiece. The Cold War's end triggered military budget cuts, and the most advanced bomber fleet in history died stillborn. Too few aircraft, too expensive to operate, too maintenance-intensive to deploy regularly. The Air Force explicitly demanded cost discipline for B-21 development. Each aircraft costs approximately $700 million. Classified items mean actual costs run higher, but nowhere near B-2 levels. More critically, this bomber services in standard hangars for hours instead of months, enabling sustained operations rather than occasional symbolic missions. The manufacturing revolution enabling this pace is driven by augmented reality and digital twin technology. Engineers don't just build physical aircraft. They work with perfect digital replicas, testing newly developed systems in virtual environments before anything reaches the production line. Design flaws discovered in digital twins get fixed with software changes rather than million-dollar physical retrofits. This digital thread shares across all of Northrop's partners as they develop complementary systems, ensuring seamless integration before the first component is manufactured. Want to test a radical new sensor configuration? Run it in simulation. Does it work? Build it. Does it fail? Delete it and iterate. Zero wasted materials, minimal risk. The strategic implications are profound. Russia and China are developing stealth bombers, singular experimental platforms that might enter limited service in the 2030s if development proceeds perfectly. America is manufacturing B-21s at scale right now, building institutional knowledge, refining production processes, and preparing operational squadrons while adversaries are still testing prototypes. 3 B-21s currently exist. By the time Russia's PAKDA or China's H-20 reach initial operational capability, dozens more Raiders will be operational with crews who've accumulated thousands of flight hours. By the time those foreign platforms achieve full operational status, American squadrons will have refined tactics, integrated new capabilities through software updates, and developed operational concepts adversaries won't understand until experiencing them in conflict. The planned fleet of 100 Raiders will retire 45 B-1Bs and 20 B-2s, potentially even phasing out the B-52 that's been flying for over 70 years. It is a complete reconceptualization of strategic bombing built around sustained operations rather than occasional deployment of precious, irreplaceable assets. Every aircraft rolling out of Plant 42 represents a node in a networked warfare ecosystem. Each can share data with every platform, coordinate with autonomous drones, and update software to match evolving threats. Russia isn't facing one new bomber. They're facing a self-improving fleet that becomes more capable with every software update, every sensor integration, every tactical lesson learned. So we have a low observable bomber with AI-assisted operations that adapts to future threats and is being mass-produced right now. But what does this actually mean when tensions escalate? The B-21 Raider has exactly one mission, stated with brutal clarity: prevail in great power conflict against Russia or China. Not counter-terrorism, not regional operations. Total war against near-peer adversaries with sophisticated air defenses, advanced fighters, and their own stealth programs. Strategic analysts understand this aircraft represents something beyond incremental advancement. It's a platform that fundamentally alters how great powers calculate risk. Strategic bombing evolved over a century from German Zeppelins over London in World War I to America's current fleet. The B-52 Stratofortress, with its massive 70,000-pound payload, the supersonic B-1B Lancer using speed to evade defenses, and the B-2 Spirit designed to penetrate hostile airspace through stealth. All three were designed for different eras with different assumptions. The B-21 was designed for an integrated battle space where cyber warfare, electronic attacks, hypersonic missiles, and autonomous drone swarms converged simultaneously. A battlefield that barely existed when those older aircraft entered service. The flying wing design maximizes lift while minimizing drag, requiring less power and extending both range and loiter time. With an 11,000-kilometer range without refueling, there's literally nowhere on Earth beyond reach. Combine that range with long-range weapons, and the bomber doesn't need proximity to targets. The psychological calculus shifts entirely. Adversaries cannot reliably track where the B-21 is, cannot track it when nearby, and face severe challenges preventing mission completion. Now layer in the capabilities already discussed, and the platform's true purpose becomes clear. The AI co-pilot enables sustained 40-hour missions with a single human on board, not by reducing workload, but by absorbing entire categories of decision-making, navigation, threat avoidance, sensor fusion, and real-time route optimization, allowing the pilot to function as a mission commander rather than an operator. Open architecture software means the aircraft is never locked into a single role. Mission packages can be rewritten between sorties, transforming the bomber from a strike platform into an intelligence node, an electronic warfare asset, or a command relay without structural modification. Integrated with satellite networks and autonomous drone wingmen, the B-21 operates as the airborne nerve center of a distributed force, directing unmanned systems, sharing targeting data across domains, and shaping the battle space before weapons are released. Its electronic warfare suite does not simply evade defenses, it actively degrades, misleads, and fragments adversary sensor networks, collapsing their ability to see the fight as a coherent whole. If conflict erupts, the B-21 leads without being near the fight. It coordinates drone swarms, directs naval assets, shares targeting data with ground forces, all while maintaining the option to engage targets from standoff ranges. Joint all-domain command and control means information flows instantaneously. What one sensor detects, every platform knows simultaneously. Consider force structure implications. 100 B-21 Raiders, replacing 45 B-1Bs, 20 B-2s, and potentially the entire B-52 fleet. Some might consider it a replacement, but it's a reconceptualization of strategic bombing doctrine. Older platforms could barely afford to fly due to operational costs. The B-21 is designed for regular, sustained operations, making deterrence credible rather than theoretical. Russia's PAKDA and China's H-20 are responses to American air dominance, attempts to match capabilities that debuted decades ago with the B-2. But they're building bombers while America built a warfare ecosystem. Even if adversaries successfully field stealth platforms, they're entering a game where the rules fundamentally changed. The geopolitical message is unmistakable. America remains multiple generations ahead in strategic warfare technology. While adversaries struggle to field experimental prototypes, the U.S. manufactures at scale, refines operational concepts, and prepares for conflicts that haven't been conceived yet. 3 B-21 Raiders exist today. Production accelerates. By the time foreign programs reach operational status, American crews will have accumulated experience that adversaries won't match for years. And the real test of the B-21 won't be when it flies, but when adversaries realize they can't reliably defend against it. Thanks for watching. While you are still here, click on the link on your screen to check out another of our videos. See you there.